On what would have been his 164th birthday, we offer a tip of the hat to the inventor of the diesel engine, Mr. Rudolf Diesel. And also on this episode, we take a look at the new EPA proposal that could bring the little engine that did much closer to being truly zero emissions. I'm Jim Park. This is HDT Talks Trucking. Joining me with a brief history of Mr. Diesel's wildly successful invention and the EPA proposed rule is Alan Schaeffer. He's the Executive Director of the Diesel Technology Forum. Before we begin, remember to follow and connect with us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of HDT Talks Trucking.
Clariant's Technologies is a global leader in transportation technology, known for its family of innovative and leading brands. Our best-in-class capabilities, global scale, and extensive industry insight provide the technologies that keep the world moving forward. To learn more about Clariant's Technologies and its family of brands, visit clariantstechnologies.com.
Alan Schaeffer, the Executive Director of the Diesel Technology Forum. Thanks for joining us today on this Rudolf Diesel's 164th birthday. Glad to have you aboard, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jim. It's a great tribute for Rudolf Diesel to be with you today.
Well, I'm glad you think so. Thinking in terms of the development that the diesel engine meant to the Industrial Revolution, where do you think we'd be today without diesel engines?
Boy, that's a hard one to think about. I think, diesel replaced the steam engine effectively. So we went from something that was maybe 10% thermally efficient when it was at its peak to something today that, at least in commercial truck engines, is, about 50% thermally efficient. So, boy, it's hard to imagine where we'd be without the advancements and the invention that we call diesel today.
I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that the first engine that he developed actually ran on peanut oil.
It is. It's one of the things, the curiosities about Rudolf Diesel, as I've learned more about it over the years. He was really interested in the transfer of heat and sort of got all into that, did a whole bunch of things, even did some solar kind of work in his early days. But he was very mindful of society. And at that time, it was an issue of his technology enabling smaller artisans and smaller businesses to exceed and not to support sort of large industrial complexes. So he was thinking about the role of his engine in society in that context. And, today we think of it, and he had a preference for using the vegetable-based oils as fuel. So, those are two things that in 1897 that were probably pretty innovative. But today we're looking back and saying, okay, that's pretty interesting, because today what are we thinking about? We're thinking about using more renewable biofuels in diesel engines, and we're also thinking about the sociological impacts of all these technologies as we try and tackle climate change. So the guy was pretty on the ball and thinking ahead in the 1800s.
Yeah, the original diesel was the original biofuel engine.
It really was.
That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
If he were looking down at us today, what do you think he'd think of the progress we've made with his original idea?
Well, I think he would be in awe, really, of the diversity of and how far his technology goes across the world and really every corner of the world in terms of what it's able to do. And, from faraway countries that, are still trying to find their way to economic progress and viability. You see diesel engines, providing power for little communities and villages. It's the only source of energy that they have for pumping water or, running some electricity from time to time. So you see that, and then you see this heavy industrialization that we have here in the U.S. in a developed country. So I think it'd be pretty amazing to look at that. And also, he was a very simple person in terms of the focus on heat transfer. And to look back and say, the engine that he started with was achieving, about mid-20s to 30% efficiency. And today, last year, the Department of Energy's program with Supertruck announced that they had broken the 55% brake thermal efficiency barrier. So, really nearly doubling his invention's performance over that period of time. So I think those are two things that would really make him proud.
This episode is sponsored by Circle K. Get the most savings on every gallon when you fuel with the Circle K Fleet Card. Learn more at CircleKFleetCards.com.
At that 55% barrier, if folks aren't aware, that is an absolute huge improvement over where we started. And getting there was not easy, was it?
No, and it's I think the next chapter of diesel is going to define sort of how much we can leverage those technologies that get to 55% thermal efficiency.
Well, that's providing the regulators don't get in our way. Just a reminder, we're talking with Alan Schaeffer. He's the executive director of the Diesel Technology Forum. And you'll recall on the 7th of March, just last week before we had this conversation, the Environmental Protection Agency proposed a new set of emissions rules on commercial vehicles. This time they're targeting NOx mostly. The text of that rule runs about, 1,400 pages?
Indeed.
Could you describe some of the salient points of that proposal and explain what it's going to mean for truck makers and truck fleets for us?
Sure. I'll give you a sort of the 30,000 foot
tour.
Yeah, exactly. So, we have done tremendous work to virtually. We talk about getting today's diesel engine is near zero emissions for nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, and this rule effectively takes us further down that road. So the end result will be a diesel engine and gasoline and natural gas. They're all under the same standards. Will be achieving even nearer to zero emissions. So the rule has several different components to it, and it's a proposal. So there's a number of options that EPA is considering, and they're just in a very simple perspective. One of them is much like the California option, which requires manufacturers to reduce NOx emissions from diesel engines by roughly 90%, starting out with a little bit of a phase in 2027, and then a full drop down to the required to the required California level, the 0.05 in 2031. So it's a sizable jump. The second option is one that takes effect more immediately and goes from today's 0.2 gram down to the 0.05 right off the bat in 2027, which is about 5 years from where we are today. So two different pathways are the primary considerations here. And if you look at where they get us in 2045, where this rule is fully implemented, it's very close in terms of NOx reduction. But there's the numbers are just the beginning of the consideration of this rule. There's a whole range of other features to it that are important to consider, and a couple of those just to keep in mind. One is the test procedures and certification process themselves. And one of the things we've learned about the diesel engine that we have today, the latest generation, is that at certain operating conditions, the emissions control technology does not deliver the maximum efficiency in NOx reduction. So at low loads and slow speeds, like you might find in congestion and on a highway, those SCR systems are not quite as effective as they are when they're at optimum temperature and optimum load. And so that means that the NOx emissions from those engines are a bit higher than might have been expected. So this rule will address that through different certification procedures that will require manufacturers to address these low load and operating conditions and establish performance standards for those conditions as well. So that's point one. The other aspects of this rule is that it starts to get into areas that are important for truckers, including issues like warranty and considerations of useful life. Today, a diesel engine has to be meeting the standards for 435,000 miles. Under this proposal, that would jump to 600,000 miles.
Wow.
So it's a pretty healthy increase. Yeah. And the warranty obligations for manufacturers are also beefed up. So they're going to have more liability for emissions performance throughout the useful life of the diesel engine. And that's to address issues about the components to make sure that they're all still functioning properly etc. So the standards are just the tip of the iceberg. And you have to look at this as the whole package of warranty considerations, timing, the useful life requirements, and the test procedures themselves. So it's quite a piece of work.
Uh, you mentioned near zero. That's a term we hear a lot these days, along with zero emissions vehicles. How close to zero are we?
Very close, and numerically close. We have been close since 2011 model year. We're at 0.2, and we're talking about going from that level to a 0.05. And this is a very, it's a different kind of step. And we say near zero. Ultimately, when we think about these terms, we could compare it to what we say, zero emission vehicles. Are they truly zero emissions, or are they zero tailpipe emissions?
Zero
Because
tailpipe, yeah.
some emissions may be coming from the generation of the fuel or electricity in that case. In some cases, there may not be that. So near zero is really where we are with diesel these days, and we're going to be nearer to zero, however this rule turns out at the end of this year.
Before we let you go, we had a similar conversation about a year ago talking about the future of the diesel engine. Maybe now you could give me a 2021 update. Where do you think we'll be in 10 or 15 years when this new rules and everything else starts to come together and play for us?
Yeah. So I think diesel's going to continue to dominate the lion's share of the trucking industry, particularly the heavy duty long haul. I think we're going to definitely see, we're seeing it already, that there's going to be more zero emission vehicles in some of the smaller, lighter duty segments and last mile delivery. That's happening, and that's going to, I think, benefit us all in terms of what that brings to the table. I'm sure that there's going to be some hydrogen and electrification in the long haul heavy duty segment. How far that gets out in the penetration, I think it's really hard to say. I hope we're using a lot more renewable low carbon fuels as a strategy to address greenhouse gas emissions from a much larger population of vehicles than just going after new technology down the road. I think we're definitely expecting, diesel's going to continue to play a pretty big role here and well out beyond 2035.
That's good to hear. I love the smell of diesel. Still do. Always have and still do. We've been talking with Alan Schaeffer. He's the Executive Director of the Diesel Technology Forum. Alan, thanks for sharing those insights with us, and happy birthday to Rudolph.
Thank you very much, Jim. Great to be with you.
We'll touch base again, sir. Take care. You can listen to the complete version of my interview with Alan Schaeffer on our HTT Talks Trucking audio podcast. It's on all the major podcast platforms and on our website, truckinginfo.com/podcast. Please remember to follow and connect with us on social media. You'll find links to the various platforms in the podcast description down below. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any future episodes. HTT Talks Trucking is produced by Bobbitt Business Media. I'm Jim Park. Thanks for watching.